This is the World Organic News for the week ending 25th of March 2019. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Today's first post comes from Avon David Callaghan on the Facebook page Irish Regenerative Land Trust, entitled, Researcher Sees Huge Carbon Sink in Soil Minerals. As you can guess, I find this material very exciting. Quote, a Washington State University researcher has discovered that vast amounts of carbon can be stored by soil minerals more than a foot below the surface. The finding could help offset the rising greenhouse gas emissions, helping warm the Earth's climate. End quote. That's from 30 centimetres down for those on the new money. This is enlightening. I had assumed from my research and reading that the top layer, the A horizon in geological terms, was the powerhouse of recarbonising the soil. It turns out this research shows the effect goes much deeper. Given that much agricultural land is now almost subsoil flooded with oil-based fertilisers, a variation on hydroponics in some sense, this research shows even greater promise. With the correct approach, focusing on regenerative grazing, that is, using stock to trample as much feed as they eat, will release huge amounts of humic acid in short order, agriculturally speaking. The humic acid builds topsoil from whatever is growing the pasture. The key element in this exercise is time. The pastures once hit hard with grazing pressures must be left to recover. This is the system we are implementing on our place. I've been using 4 geese on about 500 square metres, an eighth of an acre, for some 2 months. They have not been sufficient to heavily crush the pasture, but they are doing it slowly. I toss wheat to them each day on the patch I want worked over. They have taken to working that part of the field and then resting and manuring on the compost heap. A win-win situation. They receive a bit of warmth overnight from the compost and I receive more poop in the compost. As a layer builds up in the compost heap, I place a few sheets of cardboard on top and then the geese deal with that. Yesterday we collected 2 piglets. They are in the next field of 500 square metres. They'll be 10 weeks old tomorrow. Not big yet, but doing stellar work already. As they grow, the effect they have on each of the 500 square metre fields they will be rotated through will increase. They are a test run at this stage. If they work, and they seem to be, we'll bump up the numbers and get a much bigger freezer, obviously. Back to the post. Quote, earlier research by Kramer found that certain farming practices can dramatically increase carbon in the soil. Writing in Nature Communications way back in 2015, Kramer documented how 3 farms converted to management-intensive grazing practices raised their carbon levels to those of native forest soils in just 6 years. While cultivation has decreased soil carbon levels by 1/2 to 2/3, the soils he examined had a 75% increase in carbon. I would call it radical. Any time you get that much carbon in the system that quickly, Kramer said, end quote. And that's an amazing set of stats. A return to the idea of grain production as part of a rotation based upon building soil health through grazing, and grazing more than one species is even better. Cattle followed by sheep/horses and then chicken tractors would work well before a no-till wheat, corn or whatever your particular choice of grain would be. Even field beans before the cereal would be a workable solution. Of course, some places can't be used for grain production. They would just be carbon sinks used for meat and fleece production. In really rough country, goats could begin the rotation or even replace the cattle. It's all about understanding the local microclimate and environment. So the research is in. It seems to be positive. Go out and test it. Use what we know to do best practice, but do it on a small scale that does not lead to bankruptcy. Small test areas can be expanded as positive results come in, or that can be adjusted as less than optimal results are produced. The floods in Mozambique and the US Midwest this month, the southern summer's heat waves, the northern summer's Arctic storms all point to a need to get our acts together. More on the experiments, trials being run on our humble little space will be published here and on the blog. I hope it helps, but more importantly, I hope it leads others into taking action. To do this takes an ability to hold your nerve. Mrs. World Organic News advanced a fairly persuasive set of arguments for slashing the paddocks when all around us were doing so too. I argued that what we were doing was growing organic matter mass, and that it would be all good. We just had to follow the plan. A drawback of this plan was its location, inside my head. The effects of the geese are now visible. I'll follow up their work with chicken tractors and then winter legumes, fava beans and peas. Small and steady, gentle treatment of the soil. A final quote from the Post, quote, "Knowing more about how soil stores carbon can open the door to new techniques that will entrain carbon deep in the soil while continuing to produce food and fibre," end quote. Our next post points to the other part of the show's tagline, decarbonise the air. Renewable thermal solution provides green alternative for gas-hungry industries from the site Renew Economy. Quote, "A novel blend of old and new technology is helping Australian researchers combine renewable energy and low-cost thermal storage to deliver heat for industrial processes. Developed at the University of South Australia in Adelaide, the method involves using low-cost renewable energies such as wind or solar PV to power electrical elements that heat rocks in a similar way to a sauna. The element and the rocks are packed inside a stainless steel tank and heat air pushed through the tank with an ambient fan. The temperature of the exiting air can be simply adjusted between 200 degrees C and 700 degrees C by changing the fan speed." End quote. Almost a head-slappingly obvious solution. Rocks. Who'd have thunk it? For those of you who don't know about South Australia, it's located in the middle of the continent in an east-west direction and on the southern coast. Winds pour down off the central deserts in summer to create what would be heatwave conditions anywhere else, but what South Australians call summer. It is not surprising then that hot rocks is a thing they're researching. The permaculture idea of starting with what you have where you are. Anyway, the research is at the proof of concept stage and the proof has been achieved. By separating the heat generation from the storage system allows any number of renewable options for the heat generation. The hot rocks are like a sauna, but a sauna on roids, and it is an elegant solution. A system that shows much promise and could be implemented quickly. And quickly is what we need now. And on that note, I'll draw this episode to a conclusion. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Podcasting checklists for those of you contemplating your own podcasts are available over at John Moore Podcasting Services. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week.